Hey guys, my guest tonight, Stacy Horn, is going to stop by and talk about the paranormal and some of her books. We'll be right back. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. Happy Thursday. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong up and down the state, which means if you have a paranormal need, you should contact us. You can find us everywhere on Facebook, all the social media, all that good stuff. The only issue with it is that California is this really big state, and I mean big. You know, when people think about California, a lot of the time they think about beaches, just like Hawaii. You know, the surfer girls, the Beach Boys did all that, right? But that's only one little portion of the state. In fact, here's some trivia for you. And I don't remember what beach it is, so don't count. Don't yell at me over that. But there's a particular beach in Hawaii that they needed to replace the sand on. And they took it from Catalina, here in California. They shipped all this sand over there for this beach to reinforce it and stuff. So there's California, stuff over there. Anyway, it's a big state. I mean, we go from beaches and we go down south towards Mexico, all the way to the border with Mexico, and in between all that, you've got big cities, big wide out farming spaces, everything you can think of. Desert, as you start to go east, you hit everything. You hit desert, you hit real big mountains like the Sierra Nevada range. You've got Mount Shasta, you've got some big mountains. Okay, Mount McKinley, that's another one. So you've got all these mountains, it's everything here. California has a little bit of everything, but it's really huge. So it might take us a couple days to get to you, but we will get to you. And in the case that we can't get to you, we do have mediums on staff who can phone you and talk about what might be going on. And if they determine that it's something that they can help with, or that we can help with as well, as far as paranormal goes, they can usually calm the energy down until we can get out there. And usually it doesn't take us more than 1 or 2 days to get to you. Maybe 3, depending on, if you call on a Tuesday, it may not be out till a Saturday, because everybody works. But it just depends. But we will definitely get out there. And they can definitely calm the energy down. Okay, that being said, like I said, you can find us all over social media. Facebook, we're starting to get our website back. I'm working on getting that going again. It's probably going to be a combination site. I'm going to combine the video site with the paranormal site to save a little money, but we're going to be doing that. We'll get our website back up. It's had a lot of changes that I wanted to do on it, so I'm almost ready to get those changes going. So yeah, but check us out on Facebook, Twitch. You can find us at Twitter. You can everywhere, especially TikTok. We have almost 3,000 followers on TikTok now. So we're pretty good size over there. So you can find us. Just shoot me an email, and I'll get right on it. Okay, that being said, if you are watching from Facebook, and a lot of you are, please feel free, especially if you like what you see in here tonight, please feel free to hit that follow button. We're always looking for followers, and share the show. Share the show with people in your house, in your car, whatever, school, wherever you're at. Share the show. That's the way this works. That's the way the system works. The more you share, the more people come on board, etc., etc., etc. So please be sure to share the show and show me some love. If you like what you hear and see tonight, give me a thumbs up, okay? Or give me that heart thing I can never do. And the other day I made a point of saying, there's this heart thing, right, that everybody does with their hands. It reminds me of the Vulcan greeting, or the Vulcan goodbye, the live long and prosper thing, which I can never do that either. So that's what that reminds me of. Now, if you're watching from YouTube, a lot of you are, same thing. We've got more than 1,000 videos over there, all of this show. I'm a photojournalist, so I like to change it up. Like last night, we talked about the opioid crisis. And the night before, we talked about preserving bees. I like to change it up a lot. I don't always like to go paranormal, okay? So I love doing those nights. So please feel free to check out the videos. I have them under categories. But, with all those videos there, even I get a headache when I go into YouTube and try and find a video or look at what we have because it is just so overwhelming. So if you're into cryptids, we do have a cryptid folder. If you're into Medium Nancy Matz, she's got her own folder, so you can look stuff up that way. And find the shows you want, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I got like 12, 13 different topics over there. So check it out. Also, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe. We're always looking for, again, for followers and subscribers. That would be great if you could find it in your heart to subscribe. And I think, oh yes, show some love. Again, it goes back to this, and show us a thumbs up or a heart or a happy face or whatever. But show us some love. By doing that, and Twitch works the same way, by the way. Everything works the same way except for TikTok. TikTok is a little more, it's not more complicated, but TikTok, in order to do likes, you got to double tap the screen and all that. So it's just a little different. But what that does is the more you do that for me, share us and all that, and follow and all that, it puts us up higher in the FYP. And a good example of that is when you're on your Facebook page, you start arrowing down and you come across the reels, right? And then you come across the stuff that's suggested for you. It might be people on Facebook, it might be pages. That's the FYP, that's the For You page. And that's what happens. When you like, share, and all that stuff, it gets the attention of the master computers in these social media places, and they put you in the For You section, which means you go out to more people. Okay? All right. That being said, my guest tonight has been on the show before, and I think we're going to have a great rousing conversation. She is an author, likes the paranormal as well, and so we're going to be talking about stuff with her. She did write a book about a parapsychologist who at one time was working for the government. Okay, we might have a little conversation about that, and then we're going to talk about her other books because she's got some newer books out as well. All right, Stacy Horn, let me bring her in, and away we go. Hello and welcome back.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. I don't know if you want to take up time with this, but I've got this message on my screen. I don't know if it's to you or to me, but it says, please free up disk space. You're running out of disk space?
Yeah, what it does is that StreamYard will give you a recording of the show as well. Okay. And so that helps in case something goes wrong at my end, that I can pull your show, pull that up and fill in the gaps. So, yeah, I don't know what that's about. I've never seen anybody get that before.
Okay.
So you're probably
sorry. Just thought I'd let you know.
No, you're probably going to have to, I got that too in the personal messages about your disk space. So you're probably going to have to free up disk space at some point, or I wouldn't be telling you that. But StreamYard does do that,
okay,
to put the show on. Okay. So what have you been up to?
Well, I've been working on a book that comes out in January, but I'm happy to talk about the parapsychology book.
Okay. That's cool. That's perfect. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure you were cool with that. Otherwise, we could talk about the other projects. So, see.
Well, I did say I wrote that book like close to 20 years ago, so I may not remember everything as well as I used to.
I'm just watching your back, I'm always watching out for you. So tell me about this, and why would the government, well, I kind of have an inkling as to why, but why would the government hire someone just for that?
Well, I'm trying to remember how much they worked with the government, and the only thing I can remember is the Office of Naval Research funded work for them to investigate homing pigeons to figure out how they did that, and if they used telepathy or ESP. Mm-hmm. So they worked on that for a while, and they were unable to answer that question. I'm not sure if they know to this day how homing pigeons were able to find their way. Mm-hmm. But aside from that, I mean, they, like a lot of businesses, various government offices, had they kept in touch with the lab. I should give a little history. This was
sure.
This was the Duke Parapsychology Laboratory, and it opened in the 30s, and it stopped being part of Duke in the 60s. It's actually still around to this day, but they stopped being part of Duke University. And at the time, they were pretty much the only game in town. So anytime anything weird or unexplainable happened in the United States, people would reach out to the lab, which was run by Baby Ryan. And, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. I know she has an unusual way of pronouncing, and I might be remembering it wrong, so I apologize. So the government would be, among the people in the United States who would occasionally reach out to the lab when they had questions, or just to see what they were up to, and should this be something we should be researching as well. And the government did also research ESP and telepathy and so on.
I find that pigeon thing interesting because, it's not only the pigeons that do this stuff. It's animals. There's stories of people that move back east or move to California from back east, and their dog gets lost. And then all of a sudden they hear a scratching at the door at their new home in, let's say, California, and the dog is standing there. The dog has managed to figure out how to find them. Yeah. Or a dog will get lost, and it'll find its way home after like 2 or 3 weeks. It'll find its way home. Cats are a great example of that. I know raising ferals like I did, I had 3 go missing because they disappeared, and then 3 years later, I see them in my yard. They remembered where to go. So that is an interesting study to try and figure that out. Why homing pigeons do that stuff?
Yeah, there have been a number of interesting experiments with animals and telepathy over the years. I think it was Rupert Sheldrake wrote this paper. I forget the title, but it was something along the lines of animals know when their owners are coming home. Did you hear about this?
I kind of heard about it, yeah.
It was interesting, and I was very interested because at the time I would go to work every day, and I had a housekeeper at the time, and she told me like 10 minutes before I came home, the cats would get up and wait by the door. Way before they could hear me coming, they knew I was on my way home. And it was stories like this that made Rupert Sheldrake, if I've got his name correct, research this. And sure enough, he set up experiments and found again and again and again animals knew when their owners were coming home way before, but they couldn't explain how.
It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And like you say, it wasn't only the study of the pigeons. The government was looking at psychic, which I've had people on to talk about that, those programs that they put on for psychic ability and whatnot. But when you think about the paranormal as a whole, they could have been looking at virtually anything. They could be looking at the ghosts and trying to figure out what causes ghosts and all this. And of course, and certainly the alien UFO thing.
Well, actually, the story of the beginning of the lab, to me, was very, very, very interesting. It was started by the Rhines, but they were studying biology at the time, but they were always interested in the question of life after death. And they were scientists. And so at one point, again, this was in the 30s, they just packed up and they moved to Boston to pursue these questions. Because Boston at the time was where it was at, where anybody was doing any work in this area. They were living. And they started by investigating a medium named Marjorie, who was very famous at the time in Boston. And they went to one of her sittings to see, what she did and how she did it. And it was, I'm not saying that this woman did or didn't have talents, but it was very much a theatrical, lurid performance. At one point, she would spread her legs and ectoplasm would come out from between her legs.
Whoa, okay.
Yeah. It was just... It was a freak show, really, but based on descriptions.
Wow.
And Ryan and his wife were very serious scientists, so they just wrote at this paper lambasting her, and just how amateurish and fake it was. So for some reason, it got picked up in newspapers. Scientists, criticizes, medium, whatever, psychic. And everyone was talking about it. And as it turns out, Marjorie had a big fan in Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of the Sherlock Holmes story. And so he was furious that the Rhines had embarrassed her. And so he talked to newspapers and lambasting the Rhines. And so it became this battle. And so these two unknown scientists became famous overnight because of this war that they had with, well, I shouldn't call it war, this disagreement they had with Arthur Conan Doyle. And not long after that, they were contacted by this guy. He was working in education in Detroit, John Thomas, and his wife died. And he consulted with psychics all over the country, all over the world, eventually trying to reach his wife. And he had like a mountain of paperwork. And he wanted somebody to look at it and go through it and see, you know, is there anything there, and is it something I can take? You know, has anybody contacted my wife? And so they agreed to look at it. Now I'm forgetting how it worked, but at the time, oh yeah, now I remember. So they were able to find that some of the mediums seemed to know things that they had no way of knowing. And Thomas, I might be getting this wrong, Thomas at the same time had reached out to Duke University, who had a president at the time and a guy that was starting a department of psychology, which was new at the time. And both of them were very open to parapsychology. And, you know, hold on just one second, because I just want to make sure I get this right.
Sure, no problem. No worries.
So yes, so he did have a relationship with these guys at Duke. So he asked if they would come to Duke to go through this material. They did. And this ultimately led to them being offered to start a lab at Duke University to see if they could use the scientific method to find evidence for life after death. And so the first thing that they did was they started researching medium. I mean, it just seemed like a place to start. And what never gets talked about is that they did do their best to apply the scientific method to studying these mediums. So what they did was mediums are often said to get their cues for the answers they give from the people, their subjects. So they separated the subjects. So the medium and the person who was trying to reach a dead friend or relative were in two separate rooms. So the medium didn't get any feedback from the subject. And they conducted all their experiments this way. And they found that at least some of the mediums did come up with information that they had no way of knowing. And this is before the internet, so it wasn't like they could look up things online. And they didn't even know who their subjects were to do that anyway. So, but the first thing that occurred to the Rhines was, okay, they have information that we don't know how they got this information, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're getting it from dead people. It could be that they're getting it from the minds of the people who are investigating. So they thought, well, let's study that. Let's look and see if there's any way of people getting this information somehow, from the people in the room or people anywhere, or from books in the room or books anywhere. Like, is there some way of getting information that we don't know about? And it was kind of sad because John Thomas wanted to believe that these mediums were getting the information from his dead wife, because that meant that he had some way of reaching her. For the Rhines to say that the mediums could have been getting that information from him meant he had no way of contacting his wife. So he wasn't happy about it. But the way the Rhines tried to explain it to him and to others was, okay, I know this isn't exactly what you wanted, but if we find that there is a way that people can get information, from other people in other ways, other sources that operates independent of the body, that means that when the body dies, there is a possibility that something is surviving. So it's not really a bad thing that we're looking into this.
Right.
So from there, that led to the experiments that they're most well known for, the Zener card, the ESP cards, those 5 cards with the signs. I don't need to explain that. Do you think most of your listeners know about those cards? So those were designed by a fellow psychologist at Duke. And well, actually what they started with were just a normal deck of playing cards, but they found that people had biases, like they would pick well, let me just quickly explain. So they would have cards, and they would ask a subject, can you tell me what card I'm holding? And people they found that people would guess, like, whatever, the King of Hearts, their favorite cards would pop up. They weren't necessarily, the biases towards certain cards, certain suits got in their way. So they said, we need symbols that people are not familiar with, they're not going to have any kind of attachment to. And that's why the psychologist, Dr. Zener, designed these cards for them. So they started with Duke University students, and they found, after running a certain number of trials, that students did seem to be able to tell them what symbols were on these cards without seeing them. And they refined the experiments to try to wean out, fraud. And so they would, they would block, they would have a screen, so they would block the card so that they had no way of seeing it. They would separate the tester and the subject and put them in different rooms. Then they had them in different buildings. They would do it double blind, so even the guy conducting the experiment or the person conducting the experiment, they didn't know what symbols are on the card either. And still, people were able to guess the symbols on the cards. The problem was, that was as far as they ever got. They were able to prove over and over and over that people could tell them what the symbols were, but they didn't learn anything about it. They didn't learn how they were able to tell. So there was no way to, this experiment in itself didn't tell them anything about how it operated, so they couldn't, figure out how to get better at it. It was just a frustrating, enticing result that really didn't go very far. So that was that. But my research ended up, of the lab, took me in very interesting directions, in my opinion. I'm not a scientist, and a lot of the stuff that I found when I went to Duke University, I went to the archives of the lab. It was piles and piles of statistics and mathematics, and it went over my head. I ended up having to learn about statistics. But what I found that they had in the archives was, as I said, it was the only game in town. So people all over the country, like if they saw something, like if they saw what they thought was a ghost, or heard what they thought was a ghost, anything strange, they would write the lab. So there's, in the archives, there's like thousands and thousands of letters of people's experiences, throughout decades, and it was utterly fascinating. And I'll tell some of the stories, but if you want to hear them. But,
absolutely.
But one of the things that it did, so Louisa Rhyme, at one point they were looking for new experiments. So they thought, let's go through these letters and see if they offer anything, like if they find a pattern that might lead them to a new experiment. So they went through, I forget, like 60,000 letters. And they immediately took out letters where there was any hint that the sender was actually suffering from some sort of mental illness. And from those, and then from that pile, they took out letters that they felt there were plenty of possible explanations for what they saw or heard. And then they took it down to a certain number that could not be explained by any other means. And it ended up being like a large number of letters. But the most interesting thing that came out of that research, like she took years going through all those letters, was she talked about the fact that people heard ghosts more than they saw them.
Interesting.
And yeah, and it led her to think, because they had already taken out all the letters that, again, had even the smallest hint of mental illness. And of those letters, of those remaining letters, there were thousands from people who would just hear like somebody talking to them, like, and it never, it wasn't like an ongoing thing like schizophrenics sometimes experience. Just a couple of sentences, a word here and there. So it led her to theorize that possibly hearing voices happen a lot more than we know. Like a lot more people in the world hear voices than we're aware of, because most people may not want to say that, like they don't want to admit it. And that possibly hearing voices didn't necessarily mean that you were suffering from mental illness. It could be just an odd thing that happens to all of us.
Right.
And the only reason I bring this up was she said this, I believe, in the 1940s or 50s. And it's really a very groundbreaking question. Because at the time, you hear voices, you're crazy. And she's saying, no, it may be kind of a normal thing. And now it is accepted that it is a normal thing. Like lots of people hear voices, and it doesn't mean they're mentally ill. In some cases it does, but in many, many, many cases it doesn't. And that awareness, we could have come to that, decades before, but because it came from people who were studying parapsychology, it was discounted. It was not taken seriously. Nobody followed up.
The interesting part about what you just said was that when I teach basic psychic development classes, I use both zero cards and a card deck for my stuff. And the card deck is mainly for color, so that, what color are you seeing? As we're focusing, that's what that's mainly for. And of course, the zero cards are for the memory part. And I also do a scratch and sniff. See if I can send, psychically, I can send the smells to people.
That's interesting.
So a lot of what they were studying is the way I teach psychic development. Also, I knew a psychic, I'm not going to give out any names, it was in this area, who used to sell dowsing rods dipped in ectoplasm. And I always had this vision of her having a big barrel outside the back of her, outside the back of her house, and she'd walk out there and dip these things in. I never knew how that worked, but I mean, yeah, this like you mentioned that other psychic with ectoplasm. Who knows?
Is that person still around?
No, she passed away.
No.
But it is. I always had a vision. I just thought, oh my God, she's walking outside. There's a big barrel of ectoplasm, and she's dunking that stuff in. When the government got involved in all this, and I know they were working with psychics, for remote work, types of things. Could they? And this is how they think. Could they stop armies? Could they affect, people in different armies to prevent battles and all this? And I'm sure that's the direction it was going. But I mean, to get into something like that not even the government believes in you, and then you end up going to work for them to study this stuff, it must have been hard on the people that did this.
Well, based on the stuff that I read at the time, the government had much more of an open mind. This would have been the 40s and 50s and 60s. I mean, for me, reading between the lines of the letters going back and forth between the lab, I sensed that they were very interested in the research, and there was a fear of missing out. Like, if these abilities exist, we want to be the first to master them and use them
Mm-hmm.
before the Russians or anyone else. So there were. I'm trying to think again. I wish I remembered that. Like this
Sure.
is not. These are not experiments that they conducted with the lab, but these were experiments that they conducted at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like the same problem with all the psychics that I talked to, and why Ryan stopped researching psychics, because it was similar to ESP. The psychics really had no control about whether or not they got images,
Right.
and if they did, there was no way to verify whether or not the image that they were getting were accurate, and the information was useful. So at times, I think it was the Air Force, some branch of the military were conducting experiments, and people would give them images involving planes and locations of planes, but there was no way of verifying that the information was accurate.
Right.
So, and until they had that method, they really couldn't do anything with it. So I think that more than anything else stopped their work. But later than the time period that I was researching, they got heavily into it, and that I know less about.
Well, that was my question too. How long did they have these studies?
Excuse me?
How long did they do these studies?
Well,
that you know of.
Well, my book ends in the 60s.
Okay.
And it continued well beyond that. They what was it called, Stargate? I think that was the big thing, where they hired remote viewers, and that went on for years. And they did experiments using drugs to see if drugs would enhance these abilities. The Parapsychology Lab did a very brief study using peyote, and Timothy Leary was involved to see if peyote somehow enhanced or enabled people to access these abilities. But that experiment did not go very far. It was very funny, because the personalities of Timothy Leary, are you familiar with who he is?
I'm not.
Timothy Leary was a psychologist at Harvard, and I don't know if he got kicked out or resigned, but he was studying LSD and peyote, and those experiments led to him leaving Harvard. But he was famous in the 60s. I forget his line, like turn on, tune in, and drop out was his line at the time. But he was a very colorful character, and Ryan was kind of buttoned up and very serious, and he had to be, because at the time he was trying to get parapsychology to be taken seriously, and so he did everything by the book. Early on, he was accused of fraud, sloppy experimental controls, and so he would constantly refine the experiments to make sure that he could not be accused of these things. And he tended to stay away from things like ghosts, anything that would make people just throw up their hands and not take them seriously. So Timothy Leary, very fun guy, let's get out of the lab, let's have fun and see if we free people to access these abilities. And for Ryan, if it couldn't be tested and controlled in a lab so that he could write papers, so that scientists in other labs could replicate their experiments so they could see for themselves these things exist, it wasn't useful in his goal to get parapsychology taken seriously. So he didn't do well with people like Timothy Leary, and they parted ways.
Right. Do you think, like you said, even after the timeline that you have for your book, the government continued these types of experiments? Do you think, this is just your opinion now, do you think that they were able to get the decent results that they wanted, and that they're putting some of that stuff to use now?
I think that they did not. I think for a time they got very intriguing results. But if I were to guess, I would say they are not doing experiments of this sort now. I'm trying to think, like, I mean, maybe the experiments were replicated at places like, where was it? Was it? Oh God, this is where my memory. There was Princeton or Yale. I forget. There was another very important lab, and I talked to the guy that headed up that lab, and he had an interesting theory. He said there are all these. We have information about other fields like the gravitational field, the electromagnetic field, strong, weak. I mean, could it be possible that this really isn't paranormal, but just that there is another field out there, possibly, an information field that if we knew more about it, we would be able to access and send and receive information in this way. And it seemed to me, looking at it that way would possibly make it more palatable to researchers in other fields, like the government and other universities. So perhaps there is someone with an open mind in the government working quietly and on a very small budget doing research.
See, when I hear about these tests like this, psychics, I've been working with psychics for 15 years. Team. And it's like with anything else. Believe it or not, it's very rare to find a psychic that can do everything. Psychics tend to specialize. So it depends how they were conducting those tests, too, because you can't, like I said, it's not a one-size-fits-all. So I can see why the government might get discouraged with these tests because because all the data they're getting back isn't even. One day Joe Blow is doing really good with one set of tests, but yet when they put him into something else, he has issues doing. He has problems doing it because that's just the way it works. So I can understand their point.
When I was going through the letters, there was one letter in the 1960s from a distraught father whose son had gone missing during a camping trip in California, by the way. This was in California. And he wrote to Ryan asking him if he could recommend psychics that he could contact him, try to find his son. And Ryan didn't want to do that because of his reservations about the abilities of psychics. Not that they didn't have it, but that.
Right.
Anyway, but the guy kept writing, and Ryan was the father himself, and he just didn't have the heart to ignore this man. So he gave him the name of two psychics, and he warned him. He said, "Don't pay them except for their expenses." He's trying to make sure that the guy didn't get fleeced and whatever. So the guy contacted these two psychics, and I researched, and there were some materials at the lab that told me the outcome. So one of the psychics was a man named Peter Herkos. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He's well known at the time. He told the man that his son had been picked up by a couple from Oregon, a childless couple that just wanted a child of their own, and they were taking care of him in some farm in Oregon, and he was well. The other psychic was a man named Harold Sherman, and I had his letters to Ryan, and they were just so touching because Harold Sherman, he did get images of the son as well, but his image was of the son being murdered. And he wrote to Ryan and he said, I hate having to say this, tell this kind of information to the family. And so what he did was he wrote them a lovely letter He didn't give them any details of the images, and he also said up front, he said, this is what I saw. I saw that your son was murdered, but I need to tell you that not all my images are right. I'm not always right. Maybe it's, crossover for something else. And then he wrote this beautiful description of heaven. Like he said, I've had many images of heaven and this is what it's like. And he was trying to comfort them. Like, if he's dead, he's okay. He's in a place like this. And he wrote this letter. And so I included a chapter in my book, but I wanted to end it with whatever happened with this man. Did he ever find his son? The family was called Kremen, and the boy was Bruce Kremen. And I posted about on my blog. I said, I'm writing about this missing boy in California. And then the next day, I got email from this writer saying, as a matter of fact, I am researching another boy that went missing in California in the same area at the same time. It turns out there's a whole slew of missing children from this period during this time. And in his research, trying to find out about the child he was researching, he came across all this material. And it turns out that there was a child serial killer working at the time, killing at the time in California. And so before I posted this, I wrote a book about the police department, NYPD's cold case squad, and I learned a lot about unsolved murder and cold cases. And so I called up the missing persons department in California just to learn where that case ended. Was the child ever found? And I got a detective who actually took the time to look it up for me, and she comes back on the phone. And she goes, well, I actually can't tell you. Our cold case squad unit called and took this case. They've got the case now. And I practically screamed in the phone because I have a lot of experience communicating with cold case squads. And the one thing I know is they do not pick up what was now a 40-year-old case unless they thought they could solve it. Unless they had information they thought they could solve it. And that's what I posted. And so the guy that was researching his kid told me that he had uncovered information pointing to who the possible killer was and where the bodies were. And so the cold case squad had reopened all these cases and they were looking into it. So I called that detective, the cold case detective. I'm sorry if this is boring, but it gets good.
No, it's not.
It gets good at the end. And so I called the cold case detective and I asked her if she could speak to me. And she said, well, to some extent I can. And so I told her, what I was writing about and about these psychics. And I said, I have a description that one of the psychics gave me of the crime and of the killer. If I read this to you, can you tell me if he got anything right? And she said, well, I can't tell you now because it's an open investigation. So it didn't make it into my book, but she did tell me later. And what I read to her was that Harold Sherman had said that he took him to his car, killed him there, and that he was wearing tan khaki pants, a red and black checkered shirt, and he had a darkened complexion. He wasn't a black man, but possibly Hispanic, or just tan. She just said he looked dark.
Right.
And she was able to tell me that the last person that saw Bruce Kremen alive saw him walking away with a man wearing tan pants and a red and black checkered shirt.
Wow, that's cool. Very cool. Very cool. So did they ever resolve this? I mean, were
no,
no?
they didn't, sadly. There was one location where they felt a body. This is a guy that I think he worked for the highway department, and so he was going up and down the highway all the time. So they found one of his work sites, what would have been one of his work sites, and they took cadaver dogs there, and they got a hit, and they did a dig, but they didn't find a body, and I think that was all they were willing to do in terms of digs, because these are expensive.
Right, right. Very interesting. This isn't boring at all. I find it fascinating. I sat on a newspaper working for the crime courts department for 5 years, so I mean that's my thing, you know. Um, I mean, there are good psychics out there. There really are. They're few and far between, but they're out there, you know. And the government, like I said, the government, trying to do this, I think, they could have broadened their test too much. Like I said, instead of finding out, oh, this second can do this, let's focus on this with this guy. So that that might have been part of that part of that to try to narrow that program down. But I can see why they would stop the stuff, because there's a lot of inconsistencies. Not everybody's going to give the same answer, essentially, because that's just the way it is.
Harold, I liked Harold Sherman. He was a lovely man. Whereas the other guy, Peter Herkos, like, the first thing he did was ask the family, for more money. He goes, if you give me more money, perhaps I can find out more stuff.
Yep. Yeah, it's between money and leading questions. That's what you got to watch out for.
Yeah.
Because a lot of them that are like him will go on a fishing expedition. Essentially, what they do. They'll say, "Oh, I hear somebody saying Robert." Well, Robert is a prominent. Well, back in the older days, Robert was a very prominent name. And they'd say, "Oh yeah, I have an uncle Robert." Blah blah blah. So they'll pick a very common name. I find this fascinating. That the government did look into this stuff. I just find it just intrigues me as to to what ends were they going to use this ability if they were able to figure it all out and how to utilize it.
Well, they could use it to spy on the enemy. Yeah, the Air Force, I think it was the Air Force, built an ESP machine.
Wow. See, to spy on the enemy, and it would be really easy to, with a good psychic, you could infiltrate their thoughts as well during war. And turn the tides of wars.
You can see what they're up to.
Yeah, see what they're up to, and utilize the psychic ability to get into. I know it's woo woo. It's all woo woo. For a lot of people, but psychics do have the ability to get into your mind without you realizing it. And it's kind of like Mr. Spock. Your thoughts are my thoughts. That's where it goes. So this thing could have been a huge weapon.
I'm looking to see, I have a list of some of the people that funded the lab that I thought was interesting. Alfred P. Sloan, you've heard of the Sloan Kettering Foundation?
Yes.
So he was the Sloan part. He funded the parapsychology lab. Chester Carlson, who was the inventor of what is now called, the Xerox process. The Xerox, he invented that. The Rockefeller Foundation. Oh, the Office of Naval Research. They're the ones that funded the pigeon research. Also, Eileen Garrett, one of the first mediums that they studied. She was a wealthy woman, and she helped fund the lab.
Interesting. Like everything else, there's always sponsors and money behind everything. What do you think was the biggest takeaway from all this for the government, if there was one?
I think it was again, I don't know, because this wasn't really the focus, but at the time, I think they thought it was a dead end.
Okay.
For me, I just learned so much. I was so naive, about science. I tend to think of science just as rational people. And when I got to the lab and I read all these letters to the lab from scientists, they were hysterical. They were just angry, hysterical people, just criticizing the experiments and not at all rational. And they were always accusing the lab of fraud
Sure.
and sloppy experimental control. My favorite thing was at the time, and I want to read this quote. It's very brief.
Absolutely. Take your time.
I just have to find it. I actually found a lot of great quotes. So there was this guy, Warren Weaver, who's famous for a number of things. He was the vice president of the Sloan Kettering Institute for Cancer Research. NYU has, like, I think it's him, a Warren Weaver Hall. Very well-respected man. And at the time, he was reading all the criticism of the lab, but he was curious. So he went down the lab and went through all their materials. And he found that the criticisms were not valid, that their experiments were very tightly controlled, and he found no evidence of fraud. In the entire history of the lab, 2 cases of fraud did come up, but they were discovered by Ryan himself, and he outed them himself, and none of that was ever included in anything they published. I mean, fraud is found everywhere. You don't discount everything, because of examples of fraud. So anyway, so Warren Weaver went down there and found that they were not guilty of all these things that they were accused of. And not long after, there was a conference at, I forget where, Dartmouth, and it was about psychology. It was a psychology conference, and many different subjects were being raised at this conference. And he got up, and he said he was surprised that there was nothing whatsoever about parapsychology at this conference. And this is what he said. He said, "I would like to mention the fact that I find this whole field intellectually a very painful one, the field of parapsychology. And I find it painfully essentially for the following reasons. I cannot reject the evidence, and I cannot accept the conclusions." And I just like it because it's just such an honest answer. Like, he is who he is, and he just couldn't accept parapsychology. But he wasn't going to condemn these men and reject their experience and accuse them of things that aren't true when he saw that the work was valid. Which led me to try to find a physicist somewhere who would talk to me about these experiments. Like, because people would, whenever I would try to reach out, they would just make fun of me for researching this and for writing this book in the first place and taking it seriously in any way. And I finally found this one guy who was willing to talk to me. And I said, look, I'm in a similar position to this guy, Weaver. Like, you guys can discount all these experiments, but they really were careful, and they got these results. And I'm willing to accept that it may not be anything paranormal. There could be a perfectly reasonable explanation, but the response should be, we don't know what it is, not that it's bullshit. And he pointed to me, he said, I wrote this paper, read this paper, and you'll see what I think about this. And this is what I found in his paper. He said, he's asking a question. He said, it's Andre Lind is his name. Is it possible that consciousness, like space-time, has its own intrinsic degrees of freedom, meaning doesn't necessarily, and that neglecting these will lead to a description of the universe that is fundamentally incomplete? So he's basically saying, if we don't look at this stuff that seems to be there, but we can't explain it, how are we going to have an accurate picture of the universe?
Makes sense. Absolutely. Absolutely. I even had a psychic on staff one time. We were filming for a segment of when I had a TV show back in the old days. And she looked at the camera, and what she told me was that, I don't know how I do this. Sometimes I don't believe myself, when I get these answers, but they just come to me. It comes down to being, like everybody talks about, inexact science, And I can see how some scientists would have issues with it. I mean, I've known people throughout the years, even on my team, that every time the psychic opened their mouth, they were already debunking it. There's always the cynics that are going to be out there, no matter what. But I agree with you. I like that gentleman's explanation of it. I think it's great.
But that is a problem. I
Yeah.
mean, it doesn't mean that it's not true, but
Right.
we do need to understand how people can do this.
Right.
There has to be a way of, I mean, we're not there on a lot of things. We can't even explain how consciousness arises. So we're
Right.
not, we're in the dark on many things, but we should be trying to, pull back the curtain, not saying it's bullshit.
I would think now it would be easier to do that and conduct those tests because we do have the internet and it's easy to access, information to do the research to see if what they're saying is accurate. I mean, like with my team, even, if the psychic says, well, there was a house here before that burned down and this gentleman died in the house, it's nothing to really either get online to look it up, go to a newspaper to microfiche, or go to the county records and check that stuff out now.
But that's not the problem. There have been ways to confirm these things for almost a century now. What we have to find out next is a way to learn more about how it happens, how they know it.
Yeah, how they know it. How they know it.
And
it's so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's so fascinating to me. How do you think, I mean, with you writing this book, how long did it take you to get this information, to put that book together?
It takes a couple of years. I'd say a year of research at least. Another year of writing. It's a lot of work, but if the subject is interesting, it's
right.
It's fun. It's a treasure hunt trying to find out this information.
Right. Do you think we'll ever find out?
Yes.
Okay.
I sympathize with the Rhymes and the other scientists at the lab because, I can't think of it. Nothing I learned led me to any kind of way of approaching these questions, and people with far better minds than my own are stumped as well. Yeah.
So what's next for you?
Well, I just finished a book that's coming out in January.
Right.
I can't say a lot about it, but it came about because my publisher at the time asked me if I was willing to write a true crime book.
Right on. Okay.
And I'm not really a true crime person. But while I wrote my book about the NYPD's cold case squad, I learned that a certain neighborhood in Brooklyn had the highest number of unsolved murders in all of New York.
Wow.
And that I never forgot that. So I thought, well, let me look into that. Maybe there's something there. And so I did. I looked into that, and just not to tell a long story, it led to a white-collar crime.
Okay.
And so I've been looking for a book to illustrate that white-collar crime is as bad as street crime and murder. It's a criminal justice story. White-collar criminals, nothing ever happens to them. Someone steals $5 and they're thrown on the ground and put in jail.
Right.
So this is that book, and I show how white-collar crime destroyed. This is, by the way, a national crime. I'm just using this Brooklyn neighborhood as an example. I'm tying white-collar crime to a rise in crime and murder in this Brooklyn neighborhood. It really destroyed this neighborhood. And that's the book.
How can people find you?
I have a website, stacyhorn.com. I don't really post a lot so much these days, but all my books are listed there. I'm on Twitter, but less these days. Are you on Twitter?
I'm on Twitter.
It's not so good anymore. I'm getting more. Well, I shouldn't go.
Yeah, I know. I don't go there. Yeah, I post the show every night on here, so people can watch the show. Other than that, it makes my head hurt. Twitter gives me a headache, so I don't go to Twitter as much as I should.
It
I'm
used to
on
be
Threads
fun.
though. I
Hmm?
like Threads. I like Threads.
Oh, really? Threads is
Yeah,
good?
yeah, I
Or,
love Threads.
all right. I've been exploring Blue Sky.
Hmm.
Do you use Blue
Yeah, I've
Sky?
been looking into that too. I've been exploring that too. I'm trying to find alternatives, just like with TikTok. If TikTok goes down, where to go? From TikTok. So I've been exploring a lot of stuff like Kicks and all these different places. So, yeah. But I do like Threads a lot. It's more like a neutral zone. There's not a lot of politics over there,
Oh,
so
good.
it's
I'm
nice.
definitely going to
Yeah,
try that.
yeah. There's hardly any politics over on Threads. So yeah, a lot of people went over there to get away from that. Because I mean, the second you open up Twitter, I mean, it's just like boom, and they inundate you with all that.
And Elon Musk is insane. I had to
He is
block him.
insane. Elon Musk is a scary guy. Yeah, absolutely. He's like Stromboli. He's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Check out Threads. Check out Threads.
But the Duke
Alrighty.
book.
Huh?
Oh, are you wrapping up? Okay.
Then what were you gonna say?
The Duke book kind of opened my eyes. I love ghost stories. I love anything out of the ordinary. But
Uh-huh.
at the same time, I didn't believe in ghosts.
Right.
But I wanted ghosts to be real. Anyway, so I went to Duke skeptical.
Yeah. Right.
I thought it would be fun, but really, when I looked into the work they did and saw for myself that they weren't guilty of fraud, that they
Right.
weren't guilty of sloppy science,
Right.
I was left with the same issue. Like, there's something there that we have never explained.
Mhm. Mhm.
It opened my eyes.
There you go. Now what you need to do is hook up with a really good paranormal team and go out a few times with them. See,
Scares me. It
if
scares
you
me.
lived here, I'd take you along.
I uncovered a bunch of California stories when I was doing this.
Yeah.
But they're all from that time period, so you may not
Right.
be familiar with them. But I was going to say, I learned about EVP um, through this book, and so I started leaving my tape recorder on, and then I realized, but I don't want to have someone dead person to talk. If I leave this on in my apartment, then someone starts talking to me, I'll have to find another apartment.
There you go. I'm like
So I
that too.
stopped
Hey, I
doing
go out
it.
and do this stuff. I help people. Last thing I want is to have cameras running here. I don't want a digital voice recorder running here. I know I have ghosts here. I just don't want to hear them. I don't want to see them. You know, they understand it. My agreement with them is I know you know that I know you're here. Just don't scare me. So yeah, I'm like
Oh
that
my
too.
God! You were just like me. I've had at least 3 friends tell me my apartment has a ghost, and
Uh
they
huh.
they describe the ghost the same way, and they haven't consulted with each other. They don't even know each other.
Mhm.
And so when they told me that, I just kind of looked up and I said, "If you're here, please just stay the way you have been. I don't want to see you. I don't want to hear
There
you."
you go. Yeah, absolutely. And here I'm out doing these investigations. Yeah, I'm the same way. See, so it's all good. All right, Stacy. Well, thank you for coming, and we'll have to get you on when your new book comes out.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate
I
being
really
invited.
appreciate having you on.
Okay.
All right. You have a great rest of your evening.
You too. Bye bye.
All right. It's always fun to have her on and talk about her books, and maybe she will come back in January when that book gets released to talk to us. Anyway, guys, I want to thank you all for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. Tomorrow is Casual Friday, and medium Nancy Matz is going to be with us, and she's going to be trying. I think she's trying to scare us and me. And what she wants to talk about is what's lying in the dark for you. Wow. You never know, right? What's out there? The second you turn your lights off, what's going to come down? It'll go down. I don't do that. I'm afraid of the dark, so my lights are on all the time. So that's not an issue. But yeah, It's going to be a dark thing tomorrow. It should be a fun conversation with her. Um, Also, check out the Patreon. For those of you that aren't aware of it, I did do a pre-recorded interview yesterday, and that has been released over on the Patreon. It's for Patreon members only, and that's one of the perks of the Patreon, is the Patreon members get first look at these shows. Usually, I wait 10 days before I release them out to the main show on YouTube for public. So this is a way to get early bird, and as a member, you can go in there anytime you want to look at it, to watch it. So that's one of the perks that we have. Again, I'm going to be starting that new show on Saturdays, which is going to feature ghost stories, and that will be a Patreon thing that will air, and then a week later it will be released out to YouTube as well. But that will be a private show too. Then that's going to be a private live show, okay? And there's other things going on over there. You guys are going to check it out. There's discounts to our events and all kinds of stuff. So hop on over to Patreon, check us out, and that's patreon.com/California Haunts Radio with the C and the H and the R being capitalized. All right, guys, I will see you tomorrow. If you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. We are equal opportunity here, and we're just trying to get the word out about our little old show. All right? I will see you guys tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, with Medium Nancy Matz. Have a great evening.